So we're going to take a little trip from when the British Empire transported its convicts to Australia. Today, we're at one of those very convict settlements. A famous one, Port Arthur in Tasmania, Australia. Let's do it. So they have us take one card right here. It says please take a card. So I got seven of hearts. So we can go on the wall and look about what their fate was. Yep. So this is what you get locked up here in Port Arthur for. So this guy was George Hunt, London, England. He was a sweeper. October 24th for stealing a handkerchief. Sentenced to 14 years. Can you imagine that? He steals a handkerchief and he goes to prison for 14 years. Sent to Port Arthur. He's a lunatic. He absconded from his gang at Port Arthur on numerous occasions. He once made it to Eagle Hawk Neck, where he was apprehended by soldiers and returned to the settlement. Hawk was punished with 100 lashes for this attempt. So 100 lashes is basically the maximum amount of lashes that people were given. Also, Eagle Hawk Neck was the only way of escape from Port Arthur. There wasn't any other way off the peninsula. There's the guy right there. There's the lad. There's the guard with the old cat and nine tails. Port Arthur was named after the then Lieutenant Governor of Van Diemen's Land, George Arthur. And in the 1820s, he wanted to start up a penal colony here because he thought that this peninsula that the penal colony is on, that Port Arthur's on, was perfect for it. So in 1830, this penal colony wasn't a penal colony, it was actually a timber station. And in 1833, that's when they officially opened to be a penal colony. And the convicts that were sent here were second-term offenders, meaning that they had already reoffended after coming to Australia as convicts. And so when they got sent here, they learned a trade, actually. Their main duty was to do timber work, and their work was pretty hard. They were pretty unskilled, but they learned on the job. They learned well at the prison, and I heard there was a lot of accidents that happened too. So it was not easy. Here's the penitentiary that housed the inmates. You guys see that right there? Let's go take a look inside, see what it's like. One thing that a lot of people don't know is that this used to be a flour mill. And then it was converted into a prison. Jeez. You guys see how weather has taken its toll on this building? Here's another view of the penitentiary. I think this was where they did the laundry, this area. How did Australia become a penal colony in the first place? Britain used to actually send its convicts to America. And all in all, I think they sent about 50,000 total. But then the Revolutionary War happened, and America didn't want any of Britain's convicts. So Britain kind of thought, oh, we need a place to send all of our convicts, because they wanted to rid Britain of the criminal class, whilst at the same time expanding their empire. Or Britain started sending all of their criminals to Australia, and the criminals that were sent to Australia were actually being sent for kind of menial crimes, like pickpocketing or theft or stealing. This was when Britain started to phase out the death penalty. So they decided to send them to Australia. This place was perfect for prisoners because it was on a peninsula and it was very hard to escape. The only way prisoners could escape was through Eagle Neck Pass, and that particular area was guarded 24/7 by police and guards and dogs, and I think only about maybe one person, I don't know, like I can just count them on my hand, a handful of people that tried to escape that actually escaped. But once they escaped, it was pretty much impossible for them to get off the island because all the stations were notified on the peninsula of an escape, and the guards were on high alert to bring the convict back to prison. So we're headed in the direction of the commandant's house and the law courts. I think these are the courts, the law courts here. So that gentleman right there, Charles O'Hara Booth, was the first commandant for when Port Arthur opened in 1833. And he was actually in charge of administering punishment for the prisoners that came to Port Arthur. He wasn't a very nice guy, as he would have the guards whip out the old cat and nine tails and discipline the convicts whenever they acted out of line. Because when Port Arthur first was opened, they kind of focused on physical punishment. In its later years, Port Arthur really focused on psychological torture. Alright, so this is the guard tower right up here. It's where the guards looked after all the prisoners and the convicts. Let's take a look at what it looks like inside, shall we? I wonder what this room was. Looks like that's a fireplace right there. So, one of the things that I'm not sure if you guys have heard, but sometimes people refer to Tasmania as Van Diemen's Land. And it used to be called That was the name for this island up until 1856. It was named after Anthony Van Diemen, who was the superior for Abel Tasman, the first European to actually see Tasmania or discover Tasmania. And so they in 1856 they changed the name. The local government in Tasmania changed the name because they wanted to get rid of the negative connotation that Van Diemen's Land brought with penal colony and penal settlements. Because whenever people thought of Van Diemen's Land, they thought, oh, they got a horrible penal colony down there. And actually transportation stopped in around 1853, between 1851 and 1853. The local government put to a vote, and the people said, we don't want any more convicts coming into Tasmania, or back then known as Van Diemen's Land. And one of the reasons why the people of Van Diemen's Land did not want any more convicts because in 1840, New South Wales decided that they weren't going to be taking any more convicts from Britain. So that left more convicts being funneled into Van Diemen's Land. And I think at the height of transportation, I think maybe between 20 and 30% of Tasmania, the population, consisted of convicts. So the people said, no more. We don't want any more of this. So I was told that a lot of the patients that came in here suffered from chicken pox and scurvy, and most of them died in their 40s. And I think most of the sicknesses were due to the fact that they were doing hard manual labor building those ships and the boats. I wonder what this room was. You know, I've heard that this place is pretty haunted. I haven't gotten any weird feelings yet, thankfully. But so when the convicts were working the trade, the timber trade, they were building a lot of boats and ships to be used. And this provided really cheap, pretty much free labor for the Van Diemen Land government. I think right now about 20% of Australia's population can trace their roots back to convicts. We're looking for the insane asylum. I think it's right next to the separate prison. The separate prison being the special prison if the prisoners misbehaved and didn't follow the guards' orders while being here. They sent them to this special prison where they basically practiced psychological torture, where they weren't allowed to speak, they weren't allowed to see, they weren't allowed to see or recognize other prisoners, so they were sent to this prison. And I think this is where they started the silent treatment, or throwing prisoners into the hole, where they basically were in solitary confinement to kind of think about their transgressions or past offenses. All right, I think we're about here. So this is the asylum, which I'm pretty sure that the inmates that they kept in a separate prison that went mad from being in solitary confinement got put in here. Yep, separate prison is right here too. So right here is the separate prison. That's where they kept the prisoners that were extra naughty and placed them in solitary confinement. They usually spent about 3 to 4 months just being by themselves, no sound, no human contact, and I don't think there were any recorded mental breakdowns during this time, but I'm pretty sure it happened. I'm pretty sure they left this prison broken men. When they were in here, they weren't allowed to talk to the other prisoners or the guards. And so the guards usually wore slippers so they wouldn't make any sound. So you see all of this was carpeted. And same with these walls right here. When a prisoner would walk by, they had to turn and face the wall like this, so they wouldn't be able to be recognizable to the other prisoner. And when they walked, they had to wear cloaks over their face. And the cloaks, they had 2 slits for the eye, 1 slit for the mouth so they could breathe. Kind of looked like this. Right here. If inmates follow the rules, they were given normal food rations. If they didn't, then they were given bread and water. So right here is where, see, you can peek into what the cells look like. And then this is where the food came in. Can you imagine being kept in here? You can write letters home. I think that when they would write letters, they could write letters once every 3 months, and then they would receive one once every 3 months. All the prisoners were not referred to by name, they were just given a number. And so all the prisoners that passed away on Port Arthur, when they were buried on the Island of the Dead, their tombstones were not given a name either. So there's about 4,000 people buried on the Island of the Dead, and about 180 of which are prisoners. The non-prisoners, on the tombstones, they have their names written, and the prisoners do not have their names written. It's just a clean slate. This style prison was made after Jeremy Bentham's theory of a Panopticon, meaning that one guard could see multiple prisoners at any point in time, and they wanted to give the prisoners, they wanted to instill the idea that they were being watched at all times, even if they weren't. But it's kind of laid out where one guard can see multiple prisoners at one time. So this is what they mean by Panopticon right here. So it was multiple. A guard could see multiple prisoners at one time by just walking through the corridors to keep an eye on them. So his theory was also focused on mental torture rather than physical torture. I think this is where they kept the prisoners in these rooms. One gentleman that stayed in here, Dennis Doherty, I found this interesting. He's an Irish soldier, and he was transported to Australia for 14 years in 1833 for desertion. He received over 1,500 lashes, 3 life sentences, and long periods in solitary confinement. So, I'm not sure if we're going to see Point Puer, but that was where they kept the young boys who broke the law. The boys were aged 9 to 16, and so they were transferred to Point Puer, and they were also transferred due to minor offenses, due to stealing or theft, and they wanted to keep them separate from the main prison because they didn't want the young kids to be corrupted by the adults. But Point Puer wasn't kind to the young prisoners as well, because they often left Point Puer broken, and they were when they were freed, they were dumped into Hobart, where they didn't have any money, didn't know anybody, and they didn't fare that well afterwards. But 40% of the 3,000, about the 3,000 boys at Point Puer died before the age of 40 due to malnutrition. So this is where they received spiritual instruction right here. So when the prisoners would enter, there would be armed guards. The guards would make a sign. The guards would signal them in. They would come in, and then they would sit in one of these pews. And when they were sitting, they couldn't talk to any of the other convicts, any of the other prisoners, and they had to just stare straight ahead, sing the hymns, and participate in Mass. Then when the Mass was over, they were filed out one by one in the same manner that they came in. And I think this is where the preacher would preach. See if we can get into one of these things. So right here, this is where they had Mass. They would go in and like that. So they can't really see who's next to them. And they're just staring straight ahead at the preacher. So I think they were given exercise, but when they were given exercise, it was the same rules. They couldn't talk to anybody. They couldn't talk to the other prisoners or speak with the guards. All right, let's see what the isolation cell looked like. So they put prisoners in here that really messed up. They would talk back to the guards and yell and all that stuff when they were supposed to be quiet. See how there's this huge brick to kind of soundproof the walls. Then they have these dual doors right here. Wow, there's 4 doors. Whoa. Holy shit. Oh my goodness. You can't even see anything. I'm kind of nervous to close the door. I don't want to be locked in here. Yeah, this would be horrible. So pretty much when the prisoners were going to eat, the guards would knock on the door, open up one, then the prisoner would open up his door, get the food, and as he's getting the food, the door on the outside is already closed because the guard already left to minimize any human contact. Wow. It's pretty crazy. So Port Arthur was opened between 1833 and 1877. In 1853, when the Tasmanian government voted to halt transportation altogether, there were still convicts at Port Arthur. So the convicts stayed here from 1853 until 1877, and they were pretty much too old or not mentally well to function in normal society. So this place kind of served as more of like an old folks home and an insane asylum rather than a prison. Port Arthur is also the site of one of the worst mass shootings in Australia's history. On April 28, 1996, a crazed lunatic opened fire and killed 35 people and injured 23. This is a memorial made for the victims on that tragic day. So this is the main church, I believe. And actually this was designed by an inmate, like one of the prisoners. And I was told, or I read, that after he designed it, and after he served his time, he then went to Sydney, practiced as an architect, and then spent the rest of his, and then after he made his money, he finished his life in New Zealand. Doesn't look too bad. Still in great shape. Alright guys, I think I'm going to sign off. I hope you guys enjoyed Port Arthur and all it had to offer. Hope everybody learned something and had a good time. I'm tired. I'm beat. I'm going to go home and rest. But yeah, I don't think I even saw everything that was here. When you buy a ticket, you can be here for 2 days. They give you a 2-day pass, so you can come here. But yeah, definitely didn't see everything here. Definitely worth the visit. And I'll see you guys next time.